to kick off over here. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, everybody, to come over here and joining us to how to adapt your sourcing strategy in today's tariff climate. My name is Margarita Bello. Happy to be here with you. We have Stephen Miller from Sourcify and Aaron Alpenter, also founder of ITSPA. We're very excited here and welcome to our new reality. So what we have here in our agenda, we're going to be talking about what's the ITSPA group. We're going to see what is happening, and we're going to also be talking how to be approach the uncertainty that we have today. Also, we're going to be talking about how to go about doing the research and some closing thought. In the closing thought, we're going to have a little Q&A at the end. So let's talk a little bit about our group. So we are 3 companies over here. We have the ITSPA group, which we help brands to prepare, exit, and acquire integrate acquisition. So if you want to learn more about, happy to help you out, reach me out. My email is over here, margarita@itspa.co. And we have also slotted. We don't have Joe here over there in this live, but he has been in others, very active in. We help also brands to fulfill centers to go better RFP. So don't be shy to reach out Joe. He will be more than happy to help you. So his email is over here. Help him out. And we have Sourcify, which we have Steven over here. He's more than happy to help you out to reduce your costs and risks in supply chain in general. And here's his email into it. And with that, let's kick it off with Aaron.
Hey, thanks, Margarita. Thank you all for joining. It has been a fruitful last 24 hours. I personally didn't think the tariffs were going to come through. I got that wrong, which is, I guess, why I don't bet. But there's been a lot that's changed. So as far as kind of economic updates since the last month, I just want to take a snapshot of what has changed since the threat of tariffs came into play. The first one is you just look objectively, there's been a decline in consumer confidence, the largest decline since August of 21. As you'll remember, that was kind of the beginning of a recession and some difficulties there. Inflation is still high, and there's been a lot of stock market volatility. So we had a 700-point drop late last month, and then the market is down 1 to 2% today, just with the tariffs going into effect. From an impact on brands, there's been a couple of things that have happened. The first one is there's a mass migration for fulfillment that's happened for brands that were exploiting 321, particularly in Mexico and Canada for Chinese-made goods. 321 is still active for non-Chinese origin goods, but there's been a lot of reshuffling. What I'm seeing too is that there are brands that are struggling and really just trying to find anywhere to go first, and they are still keeping their RFPs open even after they've moved. I've had a couple that told me, hey, even though we've moved into XYZ, we don't know if this is something that we're going to keep for the next 6 months or if we're going to go through one peak season and then move. So there's just a lot of volatility and frothiness in the fulfillment market. The second thing is we're starting to see a large retail slowdown. Walmart's foot traffic is down by over 20% and Target's is down by 10% over the last couple of weeks. This is even before the I guess what they call it, the boycott that happened on Friday with Target and Walmart. And Walmart has publicly come down and taken down their full year forecast. So we're seeing some softness in retail as well. And then the big news of today is the fentanyl tariffs, is what I'll call them. So 25% tariffs went into effect today for Mexico and Canada. Trump felt that despite the 30-day stay of execution, that not enough has been done to curb drug smuggling of fentanyl coming in. That despite the fact that border crossings are down 94% from a year ago, and fentanyl is also down by, I think, 97% on the Canadian side. I think they saw that there was like 0.3 kilograms that was found by U.S. Customs Border Patrol on the Canadian side throughout the whole first couple months of this year. Canada did announce retaliatory tariffs today. Mexico is announcing theirs on Sunday. So I think Mexico is trying to be a little bit cooler and try to see if things can get resolved in the next couple of days with Canada and just lobbying interest pushing there. In addition to that, 10% tariffs, incremental tariffs were assessed on Chinese-made goods, so that the total is now 20% above whatever the tariffs were before Trump took office. China announced some retaliatory tariffs this morning, mainly on agricultural products, and there hasn't been a whole lot of open dialogue with President Xi or the Chinese in general about economic ties and trade-offs and things like that. So what Xi has indicated is that he doesn't want to have a fentanyl debate. He wants to have a trade debate. And so that's something that I think they're waiting for, and hopefully these new rounds of tariffs will bring everybody to the table. Another big change that's happened in the last month is the USTR had put together a proposal, a rule change to assess higher port fees on any Chinese-owned vessels or Chinese-made vessels coming into the U.S. Or shipping companies that own Chinese-made vessels. Today, China accounts for about 50% of global shipbuilding. There's a lot of support that the Chinese government gives to the shipbuilders in China. And the U.S. produces less than 1% of ocean-going ships. And those ones that are produced in the U.S. are specifically for the Navy. Just to give you a sense of what they've proposed, so Chinese-owned vessels that come into U.S. ports would face about $1 million fees for each entry. So that means if they come into Oakland and come down to LA, that would be $1 million charges that comes in. Chinese-built vessels operated by non-Chinese entities. So a Chinese-built ship that is owned by Maersk, for example, could have fees up to $1.5 million per entry. And even if it's a non-Chinese asset that comes into the U.S., if that shipping company has some proportion of their fleet, they will be assessed some proportion of that $1 million or $1.5 million fee. And so if you look at this, you start doing some math, there are roughly 17,000 ports of entry in 2024 that involved vessels that had these Chinese connections. And assuming 1.25 million fees per visit, this would yield about $21 billion in fees, or more importantly, raising container costs by about $150 to $300 per container. So not an insignificant rule change. And this is open for public comment for about 20 more days before we see if this one goes into effect. The next big thing is just around reciprocal tariffs. And so there was an executive order that was signed a few weeks ago directing the development of policies to reduce the U.S. trade deficit. One of the key things that was looked at was basically saying who has tariffs on the U.S.'s stuff and saying, okay, let's just match what they have. And the thought there is that if we match tariff for tariff, percentage for percentage point, then eventually they'll come back and try to lower theirs, or the U.S. will just have higher tariffs on those goods. This, again, is also in the public comment sphere. It'll be kind of up for debate up until March 11th, and then we'll look to see an update to see if this actually goes into effect. If you're to look at this and see, okay, well, how bad could these reciprocal tariffs be? Yale, or the Budget Lab at Yale, did a study on this. You can see this map just shows the percentage increase of countries if these reciprocal tariffs went into effect on some goods. It's effectively a 13% rate hike increase. If you were to take everything and average it out based on what comes in, it would raise about $3 trillion in revenue over the next 10 years, so not a small amount of money. And clothing, electronics are more proportionately impacted, just given to some of the protections that exist in some of those lower wage countries there. If you look at this graph up at the top of this table at the top, just shows you the impact in kind of take-home pay for the average consumer. And so there's an assumption here that if retaliatory tariffs are put in place, that in addition to these reciprocal tariffs, that could drive the cost down. So about $2,700 to $3,400 per household per year in kind of additional costs that's going to be paid off of these tariffs. So if you look at the impact on a category and country point of view, these are just some quick snapshots of things that could be impacted with reciprocal tariffs. So dairy products coming from Canada, clothing and fabric from India, shoes from Vietnam, furniture from Malaysia, sports equipment from Taiwan, cosmetics from South Korea. So a pretty wide swath of products. And this would be a very blunt instrument to kind of try to renegotiate some trade deals. And then just lastly, the kind of key things to think about are these upcoming dates. So we're here on March 4th. The 25% tariffs are in effect as of midnight this morning. March 12th, 25% steel and aluminum imports take effect. March 11th, the public comment period for reciprocal tariffs closes. March 24th, the public hearing on those port fees will close. And then April 1st is going to be a big day. That's the date that most of the government agencies that were directed in the original executive orders are responsible to bring back a report on how to balance the trade imbalance. And this is really all gearing up toward 2026. I think summer of 26 is when USMCA expires and is up for renegotiation. And so there's a lot that's happening. It's easy to look at this as the headline or the news of today with the tariffs going into effect today, but there's a much broader narrative, a much longer piece going on here. And I think it all leads up to 2026. You think about some of the unpopular things that the administration is doing, whether it be DOGE or some of these tariffs, the first time that they'll really be held to account will be in the midterms. And so there's a sense of urgency to change things the way that the administration wants to change things, to hopefully give time for the economy to react and people to see that perhaps it's not nearly as bad, so they have that political capital for the last 2 years of presidency. With that, I'll turn back over to Margarita.
Thank you, Aaron. So let's talk a little bit about how should we approach these uncertain times. So I think there's things that we recommend. So there are 3 things that we want to say that we should do right now, 2 things that we should do later. But let's talk first about the 3 things that we should do right now. So the first one is tariff engineering. There is the price cost sensibility analysis and save money elsewhere. So let's talk about the first one. So tariff engineer. So the first one is let's start reviewing the country and origin for all your raw materials and components. I understand that a lot of brands have like the co-mans who own the older relationship, but this is something that you can start asking. Where are all the raw materials and components that you are requesting for? So you can start understanding the impact that you're going to import into all of this. So you can see the highest tariff overview that this is going to be, and you can even look into there's possibility to reclassification options. Investigate whether a slightly modification of the process can be changed or they can be shifted into classification into it. Consider adjustment into quantify components or available exceptions that can be happening into it. Also look into price and cost sensibility. By doing the first part about it and looking at the engineering part, you can start calculating of how this tariff increase would raise your cost of goods sold. So you can start doing a model of cost model impact and evaluate the percentage of total COGS affected in your high tariff inputs into it. And then you're going to start like reviewing your pricing flexibility and any potential costs that you can pass through, say, into the market if there's a possibility of potential demands of this shift that you can actually do. Then you're going to start reviewing how your brand can absorb it, or if there's something that you can do on that end into it. And then you're going to see, can you save money elsewhere? There's always the possibility to work with your suppliers and includes cost saving and adjustment into it. An example that I'm going to make it is, at the beginning, the Chinese were not that open into it, the commands, when the 10% started like coming into it, because it was only 10% and they still thought that it was still cheaper into it. When the additional tariff was announced, I think there's more flexibility to start like working with your commands and start making a possibility of that sharing overview on how you can have a longer term adjustments into it. Consider even like having agreements that are favorable in your pricing structure into it. Some brands like PO to PO cost overview because they want to have that flexibility. But in the terms that we are today, maybe having a long-term agreement with favorable pricing adjustments, it might be a good overview of where we are today. Even identify cost saving sourcing. I'm saying identify, but at this point, it's not like start jumping in and review where you're going to start sourcing, because I want people to start exploring first alternative of domestic of low tariff regions and start looking what are the bulk purchasing of early buying strategies to lock down prices. Where are the things that they can start looking into it, and then we will go to the next stage. When they are, what are the 2 things to do later? Then, because first, I want people to start educating your team. enhanced understanding where are with your finance team and your procurement team about the tariff situation and the rules. Start with the model that you start creating at the beginning that I said in the first 3 steps of your COGS, and start like having an overview of those costs changing, and with the situation and review that is happening constantly, you can be reacting a little more quickly. Start creating dashboard and monitor like the cost changing that is happening so you can start looking into it. We're reviewing this by region, and he giving this overview, you can react a little bit sooner. Evaluate also when you are reconfiguring your supply chain if you want to diversify your suppliers. Then is when you start like looking into, okay, maybe I just want to start looking into diversifying my suppliers and map out my current supply chain and identify what are my high tariff sources and consider moving elsewhere. Then include domestic and lower tariff regions. But with this, I want to make sure that like brands are looking at that this takes a long-term restructuring into it, because local production and vertical integration opportunities are amazing, but this needs to be planned for gradually changes to minimize disruptions and reduce tariffs exposure into it, because it takes some time from brands to move to one place to the other. So it is a long game plan that he needs to have into it.
Great. And so I think with that, we want to go deep into that last part, which is, all right, if these tariffs are here to stay and you want to think about reconfiguring your supply chain, how do you go about doing the search? And so there's really nobody better that we could think of other than Stephen. So Stephen, I'll kind of hand it over to you.
Yep. Thank you everyone for joining. So yeah, we kind of did this at the first 10% raise in China. And I think a lot of people, factories included, were thinking, okay, no big deal. We're still more than 10% competitive most of the globe, or at least the bulk of the customers. And so now 20% added on since February 1st puts everybody in an opportunity to potentially find another supplier outside of China. Also with the tariffs happening in Mexico, maybe looking at other countries outside of that. So we're going to kind of go through, I don't have 2 hours to go through exactly what I do for all my clients, but I'm going to take you through like a high level path about how we execute this and how we think of this and line it up. So the big thing is the pre-work, right? We are going from an atmosphere of like, you are in a buyer's market in China. And I'm going to refer to this as like a moving outside of China, because that's the most of the requests I get right now. You are not going to get the same types of line items in other countries. You might have an ex works price in China, or a DDP cost where you don't even know where all your costs are sitting and they're giving you incremental raises. You really have to back into that and break that down. So, we're going to go through an example of a $10 piece of jewelry here. For that, line up so you have an apples to apples quote, because truly the only thing that matters is the landed cost at your door. And so to do that, you are going to have to break down what your actual unit cost is from a factory, from an Ex Works or FOB perspective, your current HTS code, the logistics costs you have specific to the order volume. If you always ship air freight, use air freight. If you're using ocean freight, containers, LCL, whatever it may be, get a snapshot of what that is for your typical order. You need to know your general duty. You know your Section 301 tariff. As of beginning of February, you need to know your February Trump tariff, and now you need to know your March Trump tariff. And then if you have any other things like anti-dumping tariffs or other hidden fees in there, you should know that as well. So the other big thing to do is, at this point, when you're going to go out for bid, you need to polish up your forecast. We recommend a 12-month rolling forecast. ISBA helps a lot of people with this. We kind of assist with it high level, but we recommend that you kind of dial this in so you have it ready for this bid. And obviously logistics. If you've been spoiled by DDU, DDP, CIF, you're going to have to nail down your supplier and really itemize out what these incremental costs are. They hide a lot of margin in this type of stuff, so it's going to be hard to get a really clear picture, but you need to do your best to line item this out. At least find out what your total duties are, what your logistics costs are, and what your unit price is. So when we get into this, for instance, this is the $10 piece of jewelry. You can see that we pay $10 Ex Works, and this is if we placed an order today after all tariffs. So you can see in here from China, country of origin China, shipping to the US. We have our product cost. FOB cost isn't applicable here because we are shipping Ex Works from this facility. We have our general duty in there at 5.5%. We have our Section 301 from the first Trump administration at 7.5%, and the two most recent ones at $10. So this $10 piece of jewelry with logistics costs and everything winds up at around $14.30. And so this is kind of like the basis of the analysis. Now you can plug in on these other bids what's applicable in the same situation, so you can get a true landed price from this. So knowing your target price, obviously, at the exact same FOB price, every country's landed cost is different. So we're going to kind of try like reverse engineer your target price, so you have an accurate like North Star of what you're going to. Because if you're going to put this out for bid and you expect everyone to be at the same FOB cost or exports cost as China, like that's not really reasonable from an RFP standpoint. So we kind of put up some what ifs here, right? And so anywhere there's an X, it's not applicable to the situation. And so we kind of did like, what if you were going to, like, let's say this is a couple weeks ago and you were okay with that first 10% increase, which I think a lot of people were willing to swallow it, or the factory is willing to eat some or whatever it may be. But let's say this 10% increase puts you over the top and that $14.30 price is just too high, and you want to take off that at least $1 when you shop around, at least get to where you were mid-February. So if we were to do that and we wanted to be at $13.30 in these other countries, you can kind of see as you back into these other places where different tariffs are notable in here, what we have a free trade agreement with in Morocco, where just general duty applies, like India, where we have a free trade agreement, but also this March tariff in Mexico. You can kind of see as you back in where you have sea freight, where you're just doing, domestic freight, and back into like, to get to that $13.30 price, what is your ideal FOB cost for these different countries? And so I think if you were to go out and say, hey, I could make that same product in Morocco for $12.50, you'd probably say go kick rocks. But then when you look at it from all these other tariffs and moving parts that are in here, it's super interesting to see that you could save $1 per unit by going to Morocco at a $12.50 unit price. And that's like a 25% higher unit price than what you were paying in China. So it's super interesting when you back into this, once all these tariffs stack up, of how competitive these other places in the world can be and still be over the original product cost. So a big piece of this is we're kind of moving from a buyer's market in China to a seller market everywhere else in the world. Obviously, with these tariffs, there's a lot of people, large companies, medium-sized companies, and small companies looking around the world for other manufacturers. These other manufacturers now have their choice of who they can partner with, and they are going to partner with the best fit for them, which is typically someone that's organized, someone that's already selling a product, someone that has a clear picture of what they want to make. And so, there's no shortage of subpar clients. So you have to present yourself like you're pitching to, investors. And so the big thing is here, like we talked about the forecast, get a forecast together, because these factories are going to price out. They would love to price out a 3-year lifetime of a client, but if they can only get a year and see, okay, what can I absorb from a tooling cost standpoint? How competitive can I be with a unit price, knowing the volume of this? Giving them a 12-month forecast and telling them you will review this with them monthly as it changes is a huge win for them. And so you have to think about, what does a factory want from you when you're doing this? And like, these are a couple high-level points of just, what you can look about. And then also from a product development standpoint, like you are starting with a new factory. Like be very clear with them of like, these are the hurdles or these are the parts, and maybe we had issues with stamping certain parts, and going through that stuff and saying like, this is my cheat sheet of how we did this the first time, and walk them through what are the potential issues here. And so they know if they see something they're scared of, you may already have a solution to that may convince them to take this project on at a good cost. Second is obviously kind of in relation to the model that I recommend you building out with your pre-work and putting in all these other prices, is review your bids, but not just from a cost standpoint. Obviously, kind of what we went through in that table is like a least landed cost analysis, but you need to also look at like the geopolitical risk. Countries like Sri Lanka right now are chaotic, right? So like this is not somewhere you'd really want to go regardless of the price. Redo their PD and sampling capabilities. If you are a customer that does not have a lot of evergreen products that you consistently are in PD and you're launching new items, you need to kind of work out what that PD process is going to look like at this place, because you might not be getting the same turnaround time as you do in China, and you have to account for that. We always recommend, what we do for all of our clients, is an in-person visit to the facility. When we do that, we obviously run a factory audit, and usually there's some corrective action plan that needs to be in there. and how likely is that to be executed by you over here? My team obviously helps with that overseas, and we make sure and we revisit that factory to make sure that they're socially acceptable for any retailer that could come knocking on that door. Obviously, you want to do a lead time breakdown of how this might change, whether it's beneficial or it may be a little longer than it was before. And then obviously review your tooling and molding, see if you can amortize it and see what it's going to cost you. See if the factory will give you credits back over so many POs, over a year, 2 years, whatever they will do helps reduce that cost.
Stephen, I want to ask a kind of a question based on what you're talking about here. Obviously, this is a lot of work. And if you find something where the lowest landed cost is actually something that is like safe and all these things check out, then that's a perfect outcome. But if there was a world where, used Sri Lanka as an example, if it was substantially cheaper in Sri Lanka, but you knew that there's geopolitical risk, you knew that it was a long lead time, you knew that you couldn't iterate, how should a brand go about weighing that factor of cost versus all these other things that could go wrong?
I would look at it from like a setup standpoint. So if you have something where you're paying $50,000 for a mold or a tool, that takes a while to pay off. If it's apparel and you're simply sending a tech pack over and you're getting something made, if you get cut off after 2 POs, it is what it is. But I would also be like, just be ready, is if you have any PO that's in process that all of a sudden vanished and that opportunity just disappeared and they couldn't ship it for whatever happened, like, could your business eat that? And I think that's the hardest part with the geopolitical risk. And that's the extreme, right? Like that order doesn't even ship and there's turmoil in that country, factory shuts down, whatever it may be. But there's also the risk of what if tariffs swing, like you had mentioned, like Malaysia. Like if you have 2 containers of furniture on the water and all of a sudden these rules change, or you're maybe not on the water because typically Trump's been honoring that like as it's shipped, but let's say it's halfway through production and you have the balance paid for, the factory's probably not going to give you your balance back. So you're either going to have to decide to either lose that balance or pay the higher fee on those tariffs coming in. And so like as we're going through this and they're revisiting all these trade deficits, looking at some of those items you lined up of like, hey, at any point this tariff could change, that's a scary thing, but that's a little bit lesser of a value. That could be 10% of a container cost opposed to not getting a PO.
Yeah, and is geopolitical risk beyond just tariff risk, or are there other things that you're looking at?
I mean, yes, we could go on and on about this, but I mean, usually we're looking at, a long-term life of this relationship from like, what is the age of the working force? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Like there's a lot of things that go into this of like, is this a long-term partner or a short-term partner, or could this last you 3 or 4 years? And so I think when you do that and you look at what the product is, how much you have to invest in that, how expensive it is to switch your supply chain, which is all based on the product type, you kind of have to make a call. And there's a lot to go into. It's very nuanced. And so we'll sit down and kind of walk you through all the red flags that we see and which ones we think are not a big deal and which ones we think we need to keep our eye on.
Great.
So other important points. What's going to happen to the countries who are not being hit with tariffs? There's going to be a huge influx. We've already seen it. I've got plenty of people asking me to run bids that popped in my inbox this morning as these things switched over. Capacity is going to be begin to shrink. So these tariffs are now stacking up and making other countries more competitive, which we kind of see from some of these analysis we proposed in here. So you're going to see the less and less room for new clients. Also, quote validity times. We are seeing people hold people's feet to the fire. So as you get through this process, you get pricing and you're saying okay, well, let's see if Trump comes back and reduces these tariffs after he does his analysis. These factories in India or wherever it may be, for instance, this was in India and Vietnam where we had this case happen, is they basically said you have 30 days to make a decision on this or we're going to have to revisit pricing, which means your price is going to go up. It's probably not going to go down. And so they are wanting you to convert on this because they have other people. They are trying to get away from people kicking the tires, right? They want these sales to convert. They're going to put time into pricing this out. They're going to run it through their teams. They're going to look at do time studies and see what they can get this cost down to. And with that, they do not want people just sitting around thinking they can come back in 3 to 6 months. The other thing is pricing. Capacity shrinks. Obviously, pricing is going to go up. That capacity becomes more expensive. We're going to see prices go up here in probably 3 to 6 months. And so it's a good time right now to get in while there's still capacity and people are willing to give somewhat market rates for these items. And obviously, the trade policy is going to be a lot more volatile over the next 4 years. We kind of talked about that in the last slide of the risk and what could be affected. So we always keep our head on a swivel. We save everyone's HTS codes in a software that we have. So anytime the rules change or there's word of them changing, we kind of know what's affected and we can let the client know up front.
Are you starting to already see prices at some of these target countries increase, or is it more of just people are starting to ratchet down on lead times or
right
times?
Now it's quote validity, and so there when this happened, I got emails from a couple people that were out to bid that basically said you have March to make a decision or we're going to revisit this. And so they were honoring the previous relationship. They had not pushed us previous to this point, but now I think there's enough people in there that they're basically saying, like, if you don't take this capacity, somebody else is, and then you're going to have to pay a premium for the remaining capacity. So yeah, right now prices have not gone up, but I would expect in 3 months almost everyone's prices are going to be up.
And Stephen, do you think that there's a risk of these factories overcommitting and kind of having this conversation with lots of people, and then if everybody says yes, not knowing what to do, or do you think that they're really holding the capacity based on a quote, waiting for you to say yes or no, and then going to the next one?
Yep. So I that's super fair. And when we talked about this a month ago, it was, if you haven't started yet, start now. And I'll just say that again. There's people that are going to drag their feet on this, and they're going to meet about it internally and see what they should do. And maybe they try to do it on their own, and it takes twice as long to get in front of the right factory. That every day you waste getting in front of the right factory, the right vetted factory that can produce these items, the less capacity there's going to be. So like my thoughts on this is like, get in now. They may overcommit from a quoting standpoint, but if you can get to PO or get your molding or tooling or commit to something like, and it may be something, Aaron, like where we see where you can pay for tooling now, get a sample, and then you talk about PO. I'm seeing people ask for first PO with tooling costs to commit to this. So we may see things where they're asking for more of a commitment up front, which is interesting. But if you're going to go through that process anyways, and the price is right, it makes sense to do so. There's obviously a little bit of risk, but for the most part, maybe you have to go through a second iteration of mold, but usually the factory is going to adapt that mold at no extra charge. And so, yeah, they're looking to weed out who's serious and who's not. And so I think there could be some potential for overcommitting, but based on the quotes we see and most people out there, they're also overcommitting and getting quotes from 4 or 5 different factories. So the fact that all one region and one group would land on that, I don't think it would happen in that manner. It's more of a long-term prices just slowly rising up is what I would feel.
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit more about the sampling process for the brands? Because my guess, even though the brands are like very much concerned about the prices, they always want to protect their quality of their products into it. So maybe you can give a perspective over here, like how that sampling process will turn over here, how that works like over here, like what time, like, because there's a lot of commitment from like getting and like rolling into the co-mans, but what is a commitment from the co-mans to the brand over here?
Are you speaking domestically or anywhere?
No, overall, like like whatever elsewhere, wherever they're sourcing all these facilities.
Yeah, I mean,
How's the sampling process?
it's a painful process. Anybody that's looking to move factories once did this sampling process before, and there's usually a couple iterations of molds. You need to polish things. There's different overflows and tag-ins on different things, and like you have to go through and dial in the quality. It is going to take 30 to 60 days to nail that down. And so most factories will tell you 30, but there's always adjustments after that first sample. So like going through, making sure that in the pre-work, we didn't really go into this, but making sure you have these step files, which we're going to get to in a second here, and have some of this IP, like, did your factory design the product or did you design the product? Because if your factory designed the product and they hold all that IP, they're probably not going to give you that step file unless you're going to keep some capacity with them. And so there's this interesting piece of, if you have to start from ground zero again, yes, Marguerite, it could be a little painful. You're probably going to have to hire someone that works in 3D development or product development to help push this along. A lot of times the factories have that person in-house, and if you're a good enough client and you show up with the pre-work that we mentioned and you look like the juice is worth the squeeze, the factory will throw resources at it, and they know they're not going to make money unless that sample looks good. But the more tools you can give them, the faster or the easier you can make that on them for them, like the more likely that it is to be a quality product coming out on the first or second iteration.
Cool. Yeah, this is interesting. I think apologies for turning this into a grilling session for Stephen, but there's just so much going on.
So current supplier transparency, and we get asked about this a lot. If the country you're in sourcing has been affected by these tariffs, obviously, like, they're nervous. On the first time, the sentiment was in China, like, they'll figure it out, right? There was a little bit with currency conversion, and some people gave back a few percent. And the swing we actually saw on the bottom line was like 7 to 8% after some of the currency conversions and things like that, and what the factory is willing to eat. And so Aaron's going to pull up this next piece on here. So just like let them know what you're thinking about doing. And so a big thing to do is, rules may change back in China's favor. You never know. Like, we had somebody that had zero duties on their tariff or on their product in China. They never paid tariffs. China was a perfect fit for them, right? And so now they've all of a sudden are at 20%. And so they're thinking like, well, this still may not be enough to move elsewhere, but it's killing me. And the factory's not giving anything on this. And so this might swing back in China's favor after they review these HTS codes. And some HTS codes may go down to 2% or 5%, right, from that 20s, right? So it remains to be seen. But keep an open dialogue with your factory. Like, never burn a bridge, right? And so you want to go back and you may need them to know where they're getting the raw materials from, because you still may be able to use them to source raw materials and send them somewhere else to get co-packed, where the country of origin can be that country. And so you could partner with them on this if they have really good raw material supply chain that they still need to pull out of China, right? They also may have other global manufacturing locations. If you see a group by any of your factory names, chances are they own facilities in multiple countries. A lot of these people are in China, have opened up facilities in Mexico, in Vietnam, and other parts of Asia. So they may already have an alternative for you. And so rather than them finding out you're out for bid or you just stop placing POs, tell them what's going on and say, hey, like, I have to look at other options. I want to stay with you. You've been a great partner, but obviously, these things are out of our control. And they also, like I had said, they may be holding some of your IP, right? You may have given them a tech pack that could be 4 versions ago. And unless you just want to go off of a physical product at a new factory, which may not work, you might need some of those 3D drawings, technical data packs, and some of the stuff on their behalf. And so it really depends on how transparent your supply chain is. But, in China, the best thing about China is they're always willing to raise their hand to work on things. We'll handle that. We'll do those drawings. We'll deal with the CADs. And so now we're at a point where it's like, you need some of that stuff to go to a different country. And so we've seen people successfully navigate this. We just moved somebody to a different country, and they basically said, here's the deal. We can't swallow this last 10%, but if we move half the production to a different country and keep half with you, we can settle with that. And so we'll keep it with you. We'll see where the dust settles. Everybody's happy. But with that, we need to know who the mill is, because we have to send this fabric over to Thailand to be sewn. And so would you help us with that? And they say, yeah, we can make that introduction if you're going to keep half of the business with us. And so there's ways you can make this work without burning a bridge and keeping capacity. And then honestly, you may not be saving as much, but you kind of are de-risking a little bit, where you have 2 alternatives in 2 different places in case the country you move to ends up having some tariff changes.
What's been the range of responses that you've seen people have with their factories? I can imagine some people saying, tariff, what tariffs? Like, no, we're not giving you anything, to others being very amenable, like you mentioned.
It's interesting from both the brand side and the factory side. We have some people that say, hey guys, I need a 17% decrease tomorrow. And it's like, well, I don't know, if us or the factory or somebody was hiding 17% somewhere, you probably would have known by now. I'd be dressing a lot fancier. And so that's really not the case. You can't just make this stuff appear. And so really it's kind of working through it. Like, you can set a target of 17%, but it might come back as 2%, right? So be as genuine and sincere as possible, because the factories are worried about losing business. They probably will give some concessions, but don't be too greedy in what you're asking for. And, the same place from the factory side, some people just flat up say no if they are at capacity and they have a lot of clients that are going to stay, or maybe they're facilitating a different market where they're not getting hit by tariffs. So for instance, we had somebody come to us from Chile who wants to source in China, free trade agreement. And so if you have a factory that has a ton of clients in South America, they may not care. They may say, hey, that's fine. We got people in South America we can sell to. And so, like, it really depends. Like, you have to tread lightly, because the last thing you want to do is go in and demand, a high percentage, and they come back and increase your costs because they're upset with what you're asking for. So my advice on that is just tread lightly, for sure.
Here, if anybody has questions and would like to add it to the chat, we're more than happy to answer a few questions.
Yeah. While those are coming in, Stephen, I've got one question that I was asked this morning. So it sounds like there are a couple of work streams that need to happen at the same time. You have to, one, figure out what you're doing with your current factory and what those costs are going to be and what the future looks like. Two, you've got to try to figure out where else you could source this in terms of what countries and things like that. And then three, you have to find factories inside those countries in order to go out and quote. And it kind of seems that these all need to happen at the same time, given the quote validity that you mentioned. And so my question to you is, how big of a team do you need to have in order to actually pull something like this off? Or how much time, like, because you can either give time or size, or how much time is it going to take to do everything serially? You can even do it serially.
So if I worked for my own company and this happened, and I said, I'm going to try it by myself. If I was only sourcing in China, or if I was lucky enough to have a team in China, all of a sudden, if you're going to move, it's how do I find these factories? The rest of the world doesn't have Alibaba. So like you have few options, and sadly the best factories don't have the best SEO. So you're not just going to Google where do I find a factory that does so and so, right? So, and a lot of times people are protected on Import Yeti and you can't actually tell who the supplier is. So it's pretty hard finding these people. Our big benefit is we have offices in all the countries we manufacture in, and they have relationships with these people. They take them out to dinner. They stop by the factory weekly. We have a good relationship. And so when I see someone come in, I look at the product, what the HTS code is, and I kind of reinvent like, okay, where can I make this and how much it's going to cost? Who do I think can do a good job at this? And so that's hard to do on your own unless you're going to go travel to that country and like go visit like a trade fair and go look at and talk to everyone, or you're going to hire someone and you vet someone out that you trust who's not going to be like pulling some off the top of the factory. I try to stay away from agents because a lot of the agents are kind of at the mercy of the factory, right? The factory has to get paid for them to get paid. We sit in between the client and the factory, so we are not at the mercy of those suppliers. And so there's a lot of people with a lot of hands in the pocket as you get into this, and you either have to replace them and go find someone or go travel there and go do all that. And it's difficult. I mean, it's a tough thing. I mean, Alibaba's a fantastic product that's opened the world for Chinese manufacturing, but that's just the rest of the world's not there from a data standpoint. And what's funny is I got like 5 AI RFPs today, so like our info at email, and it's like super clear like how things are bolded and how they're written. And people think they can just dump this stuff in a tool, but we have great SEO. And so like they're approaching someone, I'm not a factory. I can find factories, but like I'm not going to answer this automated message. I need to have a rapport with the person. I need to go through their pre-work and do all these things that you're not going to get through an AI tool. So like sadly, the tech side of things is not going to enable you in this. Like obviously we have a tech-enabled software that helps you do it. There's other competitors that have that same thing, but it's pretty interesting when you see how people are trying to go about this, right? Like there's obviously the tech piece is number one, but that's not really built out from a free standpoint. And so it's tough. Like, if I was a brand, you're going to have to spend a lot of time if you do it on your own. But if you want to do it in a timely manner before this capacity shrinks, like you're going to have to just really throw some resources at this.
We have one question, Stephen, if you can answer, I will read it for you. And there's a question is, I am guaranteed to have a hit of the 20% tariffs that important for China, or is the I cannot say this. Oh my God, sorry about that. HTSC codes for my product not necessary to be hit with the additional 20%.
Everything from China is 20% now. So even like that client that was in the like the hobby craft range, that was like a notorious thing that was like a 0% tariff. That is now getting hit with a 20% tariff. So it's a blanket 10% from February, blanket 10% from March. So regardless of what you're sourcing, there is no getting around that. Now, they are going to revisit that, and all of those numbers may change kind of strategically based on the industry. Like I'm sure automotive is going to remain around 20-25%. Solar panels will remain high. Extruded aluminum will remain high. But some of these other things that like school supplies and things like that, they may give some mercy to, and they may bring those down to like a 2 or 3%, but it kind of remains to be seen.
My recommendation that I went back to doing that model then and keep it up with that dashboard is important into it, because things might change in the process into it, and keep up and make changes in your company and your understanding of what you're doing. It is important so you can keep up with it as things are changing, as you review your changes into it and notifications. You can pivot as your company and keep up with the notifications into it. I think we have another questions over here. Maybe I give up to this to Aaron. If a company sources from China and Mexico 3PL, then send to US for a final distribution, is the only hit at this time the Mexico origin hit, or there is also a Mexico hit too?
Yeah, good question. So the tariffs are typically on the country of origin. And in this particular case, if you were producing something in China, sending it to Mexico, and then shipping into the US, first off, 321 has been closed. So it used to be that you would be okay if it was under $800, and you'd be paying the 20% incremental tariffs on those products to China. 321 is still valid for product of Mexico or product of Canada for now. There's actually some clarifying executive orders that came out, I believe, yesterday, that basically said that that 321 was going to be allowed. But the reason for it was because customs needed to figure out a way to handle everything. You may or may not be aware that when all this went down in February, and they just said, "Oh nope, it's across everything," and we're going to take the 10% on all Chinese products from day one. USPS actually refused to take on any packages for about 24 hours, and it caused this massive issue of like, well, what do we do? And customs is like, well, we're supposed to process all these things. We don't have the manpower technology to do it. And so like, what do we do? So they end up backtracking on that for Chinese origin things. They're picking those up and they're kind of sorting out. But just know that 321 is probably only has months left, certainly not years. And so in this particular case, you'd be paying the Chinese tariff.
And if distribution is happening in the US with that, I would say just unless you're reworking it or doing something in Mexico, this sounds like they're distributing to customers in the US. Like maybe this is like a B2B play, but I would say that you look at something like Slotted for like a US 3PL and just cut out that the loophole's no longer there, so Mexico really isn't needed if there's not work being done there. But at least if you bring it into the US, you are paying duties on the wholesale cost you bought it for. If you bring it in sold to a customer, you are paying the duties on a much higher cost.
Right. So if I pay $10 but sold it to you for $50, I'd be paying the duties on the $50 instead of the $10.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. Stephen, question I have for you is, how long should people be planning for all of this search to take? Is there something here where this is like, oh yeah, you're going to be really busy, but you'll be done in a week or two? Or is this like a year-long thing?
If you do the pre-work and you have that stuff done and it's a pretty clean RFP, or we can coach you through it pretty quickly, typically we can have a pretty strong analysis from a couple different countries within a month. Some countries in China, the typical turnaround is 2 weeks or less. But with other parts of the world, with all this influx of business, we usually a week to get quotes from a couple different areas of the world and bring them to the table in an analysis. And then from there, it's if the price looks good, jump into sampling. And so sampling, depending on what kind of molding or what's involved in that, apparel is obviously a little smaller, but like if you have to tool something and you want to do it on soft tooling before you invest in the hard tooling, like they add 30 days for each of those steps. And then obviously 30 to 60 days, depending on how much raw material sourcing is involved. So like you stack up to 6 to 9 months pretty quick, but starting now gets you ahead of everyone else that's going to start in a month, because everyone's pretty much held to the same timelines, regardless of when you start.
Question over here, Aaron, I will give this to you. Is there a material benefit for a company to move their 3PL from Canada, Mexico to the US or other country, or it doesn't matter as long as the product comes from China?
It's a good question. There's a couple of questions inside that question. The first part is in terms of material benefit of being in the US versus a different country. Certainly, where the world is going is getting the distribution closer to your end customer. And so, assuming you're selling in the US, uh, the perfect model would be to be as close to your end customer as possible. If you look at Amazon's network, they have over 100 different warehouses that are as close to urban centers as possible because they're minimizing that distance that's being shipped. And so, by being in the US versus on either side of the border, you're instantly looking at a potential savings from not only a cost perspective and parcel, but also from a speed point of view. And that can have all sorts of benefits for, uh, reorder rates and satisfaction and things like that. So you should definitely weigh those as well. The other part of your question is really around kind of avoiding tariffs and things like that. If your product is being made in China and it's not being significantly changed or manufactured in another country, then that's the thing that you have to deal with, right? Because those are the tariffs that are coming through. Today, Mexico and Canada being the same thing. And so if you're able to pick something up and move it pretty easily, and you can go from Mexico to the DR as an example, you should do that, right? Because there are still lots of countries around the world that have free trade agreements or much lower tariff arrangements with the United States. And so if you're able to lift and shift, you're going to be okay from that point of view. However, it's not a small thing to change a factory, and it's especially in your commodity. It could be a year before you go about and qualify and get new tooling and those sorts of things. And so it really depends on the commodity that you have. And if it is something that is very easy and quick to put together, like Stephen mentioned on apparel, that's something where you can be a little bit more reactive and maybe you're chasing the lower percentage points. But if you're doing something that is requiring significant tooling, right? Think about automotive. Despite these tariffs being 25% across the entire North American supply chain, there's probably not going to be a whole lot that changes for a year, right? They'll try to flex and go back and forth as much as they can, but the investment in infrastructure and tooling, and also a perception of what does the future look like, and I'm willing to endure a little bit of pain right now if I know it's going to go away in a week, versus it may never go away. And so those are sorts of things that you have to suss out.
I agree. And I also will add that I will say it is that I have seen that it depends sometimes. I have seen that some clients they like, depending on the product, what it is they have this trend of keeping everything that is outside of the US. Maybe they have a fulfillment centers in like Asia that they keep like fulfilling everything outside, and the US stay in the US. So there's another trend that is over there, and this avoids some of this situation too. That this will be another, maybe a possibility into it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually had a conversation with another brand that wasn't the U.S. was an important market to them, but they weren't 100% U.S. And they're just like, okay, this is fine. Like, we're just going to grow in Europe more. We're just going to, we're going to grow in Australia more because we don't have to deal with all this nonsense that's going on. And so, to your point, maybe this is an opportunity where if your product is coming from China and there's something so unique about it and it doesn't make the U.S. market as attractive, well, first thing you're going to try to do is just say, all right, well, I'm going to take price and see, if there is no alternative that's out there, people are going to have to pay for that, and maybe I'll sell less, but at least I'll still have a market here. But other people are just going to be great. I'm going to shift my marketing dollars to Australia or to the EU or things like that. So I think it's important to look holistically, and it is easy to think about the U.S. as the center of the global world because it is a very important part. But I think if you add up everywhere else compared to the U.S., everywhere else is a bigger market.
Yeah, I think with that, Aaron, the other interesting thing is, let's say the US is only half your market, then you can move half your capacity to, say, another country. And so, like, you could run two production lines in different countries to service those.
Think this has been very delightful of a conversation, and we have been really enjoy all the questions that we have been brought up to us. Thank you everybody who participated and joining us and listened to us. We're happy to keep updating you. We are happy to keep inform you as we give updates over here. I know, Aaron, you want to give another more updates over here before we go?
No, I mean, I keep glancing at my phone to see what's going to change. I think that, you know, I think the last question that I'll answer is I had someone ask me a few hours ago, so what do you think is going to happen? Is this a temporary thing? Is this something that is going to go away? And I think the real answer is nobody knows, right? So I think that you have to come up with your own informed opinion. My personal informed opinion is that if these tariffs make it through the first 7 days, that they're probably here for a long time. And that if these tariffs become here and semi-permanent for the foreseeable future, then that would suggest that tariffs on the EU, on Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, etc., will probably be coming as well. Because if we're willing to penalize our two largest trading partners, well, three when you throw China in there, and kind of say, we're okay with the volatility, we're okay with the nosedive in the economy, we're okay with these costs going up across the board because there's some other political goal that we have that is more important, then that just suggests that everything is going to change and everything is going to be, have more friction in there. So that's my personal opinion or belief. I reserve the right to change it as we get more information in the next couple of hours or days, but that's where I stand.
I think one thing I'd add to this is for this 20% tariff increase, we were finding savings and benefits in other countries for these brands. And a big piece of why people weren't really motivated to go look was because it's a difficult lift to go find manufacturers in other countries. So like we've been doing this. So like there's a chance we could find your pre-tariff, like beat your pre-tariff rates on some of the stuff because we were doing that. I mean, that's been our business for years, right? So there's still a huge opportunity to find savings out there. It's just, dedicating the time to go do it.
Finding savings elsewhere. Point number 3. So we're happy here to be here with you and talking to you guys today. Thank you so much for connecting in our live. We hope to be in touch. Reach us out if you have any questions. Thank you.